Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Sci-Fi Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Erschen, and this week we're talking all about Superman from 2025, directed by James Gunn. And this is the first film in the new DC universe, because the last version of that universe was the DCEU, and that ultimately failed. You know, we started with Man of Steel with Henry Cavill as Superman. And, it was a very dark and brooding and intense version of Superman. And then, of course, when you got into Batman versus Superman, it got even more dark and brooding and intense, So that version of the DC Universe didn't quite connect with fans. So now we got this kind of new rebooted version that's much more colorful and bright and comic bookish. Yes, it's literally like a comic book brought to life, and it just made me feel like a kid again, So warning, guys, this is going to be a spoiler-filled review. So if you've not seen the film, definitely go check it out in theaters, then come back and check out my review. And make sure you do that because I want you guys to hear my thoughts. I got a lot to say about this one. It just really got to me, So, with that being said, my initial thoughts are I absolutely love this film. I much preferred it to the much darker DCEU universe. This is more my speed when it comes to comic book films, especially Superman, It brought me back to when I was a kid, reading those Superman comics back in the day. I always remember reading the comics when I read the Marvel stuff. It was always kind of a little bit more grounded in reality, where you had Spider-Man in New York City and Daredevil in Hell's Kitchen and all that. But when it came to the DC universe, it was always way out there, very sci-fi, very, fighting monsters in outer space, all this crazy wild stuff. And that's what this makes me feel like. So it brings me back to when I was a kid. That's the version that I remember as a kid, so that's what this feels like the most. Is those old DC comics when they were always fighting out in outer space, very sci-fi, Yeah. So we have David Cornswet in the role of Superman / Clark Kent / Kal-El. And we have Rachel Brosnahan in the role of Lois Lane. Nicholas Hoult is our new version of Lex Luthor. And we also have Nathan Fillion as Guy Gardner, the Green Lantern. And yes, Superman has allies in this film called the Justice Gang. Yes, not the Justice League yet. And that's Guy Gardner's Green Lantern. We have Mr. Terrific, who I never really knew much about going into this, but man, what a great character, huh? And Hawk Girl as well. So yeah. Now this version of Superman, we don't have to get into the big origin story. We know when he gets sent from Krypton down to Earth in a little ship by his parents, and growing up in Smallville as a kid and going to high school and all that, Here we already have an established Superman. He's been Superman full-blown for 3 years now. And when we open the film, it does have a little bit of crawl explaining the origins. But we're right into the thick of battle right away. He had just been in a big match with, yes, Ultraman. So he does fight Ultraman in this film. And when it comes to Superman in this film, he doesn't seem like the god that we know him to be, especially in that last version. Here he seems a lot more human and a lot more vulnerable and a lot more relatable, which is really cool, This version of Superman definitely has elements of the old Christopher Reeve films. And he's all about good and truth, justice, and the American way kind of thing. But he also has a modern sensibility to him as well. And I think that's great. And I think David Cornswet may be my favorite live-action version of Superman, because to me he just embodies everything that Superman should be all about and what he is all about in the comic books, you know. And, you know, I think he just nails it. I think the actor does a fantastic job, and I can't wait to see what they do with the character moving forward. So it's so great to see Superman back, you know, in a big way and represented in such a great way. And James Gunn does a great job with it, you know. And that's the biggest thing I can say about this film, is they nail Superman in every way. I'm not saying it's a perfect film. It does have some issues, which I'll get into, but overall I think it's an excellent start to the new DC universe, and I can't wait to see what's next. So that's the biggest thing coming out of this film, is great start, can't wait to see what's next. It kind of reminded me of Captain America, the First Avenger, where it was like, yeah, this is a great start, I want to see what's next. And when they did the next film, it was much better. You know, you had, obviously you had Civil War and the Winter Soldier, and those were fantastic, you know. But this is an excellent start. And when it comes to Metropolis and this new DC universe, there are tons of super-powered beings in the world, you know, in this universe. So when we think of Superman, and every imaginable power that you can think of, you know, the heat vision, the X-ray vision, super strength, super speed, he can fly, all this stuff, you know. You think, wow, he's like a god, you know. But here, you know, he takes a beating, you know. He gets his ass handed to him several times. Because he's not the only one with great power, you know. And that's the thing, you know. While he is probably the most powerful being in the universe, he's not the only one. So you could get a whole team of superpowered beings to take him on, and he's going to take a whooping. And we see that a lot in this film. And of course, at some point in the film, you know kryptonite's going to come into play, and it does, you know. And he gets weakened, and he gets beaten down, you know. We have never seen Superman take this much of a beating, you know. So it's kind of off-putting at some points. You're like, wow, when is he going to get up and do his thing, you know? But eventually he does, so. But man, they throw every possible obstacle at him, you know. But when he does finally come to strength and come to light at full peak power, it's awesome. You know, I love it. And you're like, yeah, Superman's back, yeah. And I love it. It just gets so intense. Now, Lex Luthor in this film is, man, I think he's probably the best iteration of Lex Luthor that we've seen, the most comic book accurate version. Man, he just absolutely despises Superman. He wants to do everything possible in his power to annihilate Superman from existence, you know. And he's very, it doesn't matter, he's so successful, he's so intelligent, he's created this whole corporation, he's a science genius, a tech genius, and it seems like no matter what he does, no matter what he achieves, no matter how rich he is and how powerful he is, he just feels slighted by Superman. He feels like the attention should be on him at all times, but here comes Superman from outer space, from another planet, and he's getting all the attention. I got to remove this threat to my power, you know. He basically wants to rule the world like every villain should, you know. Like every powerful villain in film should be, you know. And that's what he represents, and I think he does an excellent job with it. Rachel Brosnahan, I think, is great as Lois Lane. She kind of reminded me a little bit of the Margot Kidder era Lois Lane. Very hard-nosed, you know, reporter, always wants to get to the bottom of that story and do whatever it takes. And she does a great job. And she does get into the action a little bit, too. You know, we even see her flying one of these space vehicles at one point. It's kind of funny. But yeah, this is not a pushover Lois Lane. This is not a damsel in distress Lois Lane. This is a very intelligent, powerful woman. And there's some great scenes with her and Clark Kent, when they do an interview together. And it was a little bit of a callback to the old 1978 Superman, because she interviews him in that film too. Although in this version they had already been dating for a while, so she already knows that he's Superman at this point. But it's a great scene, and it gets very emotional, and we get to know Superman a little bit in that scene as well too. They're even a little bit combative, but it's that kind of in that playful, romantic way, almost like an old married couple. But it feels very realistic in this huge universe filled with superpowered beings. It's nice to have some of these quieter, realistic moments, and we do get several of them throughout the film, and I think it's a great balance, and James Gunn does a great job of that, where we take a break from all the wild, crazy sci-fi action and have a real scene grounded in reality, and it's really nice to see, and he does an excellent job with it. As you might expect, there is a lot of humor in this film, as we have seen so much of from James Gunn in the past, with Guardians of the Galaxy and all that, and the Suicide Squad, and no difference here. There's lots of humor, and I think for the most part it does hit. I found myself chuckling quite a bit several times. I think the best line in the movie where Green Lantern, Guy Gardner, when they're in the Halls of Justice, which was so awesome to see, by the way. It just brought me back to, the Super Friends when they had the Halls of Justice, and then you had the villains with the Legion of Doom. And it looks so accurate to the comic, it's so cool. But anyway, the funniest line in the movie for me is when they start talking about superheroes, like, we're of the cloth, and Lois Lane is like, of the cloth? What are you talking about? And he's like, Yeah, I thought that was hilarious. That got me. But not everything hits when it comes to the humor. Now, I'm going to say something that might be a little bit controversial. I think they went a little bit too far with Crypto, the super dog, at some points, At first I thought it was cool, and I thought it was fun and cute, and, at least it was a little bit more of like a real dog, because the dog misbehaves at times, and I can see where kind of a dog lover type of person would really enjoy that. I'm not particularly a huge dog lover, so it didn't really affect me that much. But there were a couple of moments where I was like, oh, when Superman wakes up and the dog's like curled up with him. I thought that was cute, but I felt like he was too important to the story, like like he's in it a lot. I didn't expect him to be such an important character in the film. He's like Superman's co-star, basically. I'm like, Jesus, that's a little much here, A lot of the action, involved the dog, and it's like, alright, enough already. Enough! But, I think it worked here and there, but I thought it went a little too far at times, for me, personally. But yeah, I can see how a person that's a dog lover would really enjoy that, but yeah, for me, it was a little much at times. And that's the parts of the humor that didn't work for me. Everything else I thought was good. Even in some of the more dramatic moments, there were a couple times where I was like, you could have dialed back on the humor a little bit there, Let some scenes, play out, But I feel like James Gunn sometimes can't resist throwing that one-liner in there, But for the most part, I think the humor really worked pretty well. Very much in line with Guardians of the Galaxy and the Suicide Squad and stuff. And another thing about James Gunn that I think he does a great job with is balancing this world of all these different characters. You got the Justice Gang with Mr. Terrific and the Hawk Girl and Guy Gardner, and everyone gets their chance to kind of shine, you know. And there's just so much going on in this movie. Like I said, he's trying to build a new universe. And a lot of people, you'd be like, oh, this is too much. What's going on? This is crazy, you know. There's too much going on. It's too busy. It's too much. But he handles it very well, I have to say. He has a way of balancing it all. You know, like I said, we never really lose focus of Superman. Superman is the main point of this movie, and we never lose sight of that, which is great. You know, that's what I want to see, you know. But he has a way of balancing the action and introducing all these characters, and, you know, Lex Luthor gets a lot of time to shine, you know, and he even introduces characters like Metamorpho and stuff like that, you know, Ultraman, and, yeah. We even get, spoiler alert, Bizarro's Superman, which we have not yet seen in live action in the big screen. So we got to see Bizarro's Superman now, so I was like, oh shit, that's awesome. I thought that was pretty cool, you know. I did not expect to see Bizarro's Superman in this movie. Getting into Mr. Terrific, I thought he was a really cool character, and I didn't know anything about that character, honestly. But, man, they really handled him well. I thought the actor did a terrific job. And that was an interesting character. Being a horror fan, he kind of reminded me of the Tall Man, with the Tall Man, with the spheres, you know, from Phantasm. I can't help but think that, being a horror nerd, of course. Nobody else is going to think that. But yeah, I love that. Great character, and I thought Nathan Fillion was so funny and so accurate to the comic book version of Guy Gardner that I remember from the comics. He had the bowl cut, the horrible hairdo, and he had that arrogant attitude, that swagger, that utmost confidence, which was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed him. Yeah. So the action itself was great too. The CGI was great. There were a couple times where it might have been a little bit too much, where I couldn't tell what was going on. There's just so much thrown at the screen at one time. But overall, I think it was pretty well balanced and pretty intense. Like I said, it is very comic booky, very bright and colorful, but I enjoy that because, you know, I loved the comics growing up as a kid, you know. And I think that this was the perfect style for this type of Superman movie. And this is how I picture Superman, you know. And this is how I want it to be. So I am all on board. I am completely on board for this version of the DCU so far. Now, let's get into some of the spoiler things. A couple of things which I think might put off some hardcore fans of the DC. And that was the fact that when it came to Superman's parents, we all have this vision of Superman's parents, Jor-El, you know, and of them being good people, you know, and they sent Superman down to, you know, to Earth to help them, to guide them, and whenever they're in need, come to their rescue, you know. Be there as a beacon of hope, a beacon of light for people, and this film kind of takes that away, you know. We get a different side to that, which I was like, kind of blown away. I'm like, wow, what? What? So, they are not what we thought, apparently. They are not what they seem that we've seen in previous versions of Superman, you know. There was kind of a devious side to them. They were like, no, we want you to go down to Earth to rule the world and create a new universe where you rule and everything. So be prepared for that, folks, because something like that in the wrong hands could be devastating. It could change the whole image, the whole outlook, the whole trajectory of what Superman is and why he is the way he is. Because, in previous iterations of Superman, that's all he has to go by is what he sees from those transmissions in the Fortress of Solitude. He's got those scrambled videos, and that's all he knows, So, in the wrong hands, like I said, that could be devastating, but the way James Gunn handles it is interesting because he kind of flips it on its head, because Superman says, well, my parents aren't who I thought they were, so I'm gonna go by the way I was raised by Ma and Pa Kent over in that little town in Smallville, Kansas. And there's a great scene where Superman does go back to Smallville, and his parents are still alive at this point. It's just a great scene, and we see that, they instilled him all the values that are important in life, and that's great. And there's one really touching scene between Clark and his father, and it's like, oh, you may want to shed a tear, but then of course James Gunn throws a joke in there right afterwards. And that's something else that might put people off, is we don't really see a whole lot of Clark Kent, and even when we do, it's not the super goofy version like we saw in the originals with Christopher Reeve. It's definitely he's almost kind of the same as Clark and Superman. There's not a whole lot of difference, just that he wears the glasses. And there's a joke in the film too with Guy Gardner once again when he says Superman wears these special glasses that make you see who he wants you to see. And, well, that's why people don't know who he is, huh? Thought that was funny. And yeah, we see some of the crew at the Daily Planet as well. We don't get a whole lot of scenes with, like, Perry, the newspaper editor. But we do get a lot of Jimmy Olsen, and some people might find his little trek, because he has a little side story going on there with Miss Tessmacher. So yes, Miss Tessmacher returns in the film, and she's kind of Jimmy Olsen's side piece, but at the same time, she's Lex Luthor's side piece as well, so they kind of see each other behind Lex's back. It's kind of funny. Because this version of Jimmy Olsen, he's kind of a ladies' man. Even though he is still the same kind of dorky kid that we see in the other versions of Superman, somehow this version is attractive to the ladies, apparently. But yeah, I really like that. I really like this Jimmy Olsen. That was a lot of fun. But some people might think that's off-putting that he goes into this kind of little side quest. It's almost like Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. Remember those comics? But I like that version of Jimmy Olsen. He was really cool, and I thought he was a really good character. And all around, I think the cast is just fantastic, and the casting by James Gunn is perfect, pitch perfect, especially David Cornswet as Superman. Yeah, he's my Superman going forward, so I'm all aboard, and I'm ready for this version of the DC Universe, and they're off to a great start. Let's get it off and running, baby. I want more. So definitely go check out the new Superman in theaters, and then come back and see my spoiler-filled review. And thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Erschen, in the Sci-Fi Corner. Tune in and blast off.